Rain beads on the window. The premium line inches forward. Dr. Leona Marshall, a black CEO with a ticket that reads 5C, sets down her passport and a calm that could steady an aircraft. The agent barely looks up. Economy is over there, on board. A white executive smiles from her seat. A senior attendant calls it company policy. A curtain falls. Row 34 waits. What happens when the rules bend, and the bending always leans the same way? What does power look like when it refuses to shout? How far can quiet go in a cabin that decides who deserves attention and who does not? If a woman writes everything down, names, times, exact words, does the truth still get ignored? Will a single flight expose an entire system? And when the cockpit learns who she is, will anyone do the right thing before the wheels touch down? This is not a story about a seat. It is a story about a standard. Watch what a measured voice can do to a moving machine. If justice stories matter to you, tap like, share this with someone who needs the reminder, and subscribe so you do not miss the moment the cabin goes silent and everything changes. Now, let's begin. San Francisco International still slept in its own way at 6:15 a.m. But the rain kept everyone moving just a little faster. The terminal glass wore a soft haze, beads of water chasing each other down toward the ground. In the premium check-in area, the carpet smelled faintly of coffee and new luggage. The line for business and first class was short, a quiet stream of travelers in tailored jackets and worn leather carry-ons. Dr. Leona Marshall stood with her passport, her business class boarding pass, and the quiet confidence of someone used to airports. She was dressed in a navy blazer over a cream blouse, black slacks pressed to a sharp crease, and low heels that barely made a sound when she stepped forward. Her bag was small, organized, ready for the overnight flight to London. When it was her turn, she placed her documents on the counter. The agent glanced up only briefly, scanning the ticket, then looking down again. "Economy's over there," she said, her finger flicking toward the much longer line winding past the ropes. Leona let a breath fill her chest before she spoke. "Seat 5C, business class." The agent frowned as if she'd misheard. Then she took another look at the ticket, her eyes pausing on the bold business class line, and without apology printed a luggage tag. The sound of the printer seemed louder than it needed to be. The tag slid across the counter with a muted thump. "Thank you," Leona said evenly, retrieving her things. The agent gave a clipped nod. Next, Leona moved away, but the moment stayed with her. Not the worst thing she had ever faced, not even unusual, but the first small note in what she knew could become a familiar song. She had learned long ago that bias rarely announces itself. It's a glance, a tone, a gate closed in small ways. She walked towards security, her mind already in the rhythm of international travel. Shoes off, laptop out, jacket folded neatly in the tray. The line here moved fast, but she caught the way another passenger, a white man in his 40s with a monogrammed duffel, got waved through with his jacket still on, laptop still in the bag. She added it to memory without changing her expression. At the gate, the boarding screen glowed with the airline's soft blue. Skyreach Airways to London Heathrow. On time. Group 1 boarding in 5 minutes. Leona found a seat off to the side, opened her tablet, and began reviewing the deck she would present to the European division of Orion Global Systems the next morning. The numbers were strong, the new product line ahead of schedule. She had planned to use the flight to refine her talking points, maybe rest. Boarding began. She joined the short priority line, scanning her pass and stepping onto the jet bridge. The smell shifted jet fuel. the faint chemical scent of air conditioning, and the warm note of brewing coffee from the galley. Inside the aircraft, business class stretched in a gentle curve of wide seats and low, indirect light. Her seat, 5C, was in the center section, or it should have been. A man was already there, his jacket draped over the armrest, his laptop bag stowed neatly overhead. Grant Holloway. She recognized the type without knowing his name, the easy sprawl of someone who expected the space to be his. He looked up briefly, then back at his phone. "I think you're in my seat," she said, keeping her voice even. He smiled, like he'd been told a joke he had heard before. "No, this is mine." Before she could reply, Patrice Colburn, the senior flight attendant for business class, approached, perfectly arranged blonde bob, uniform pressed to perfection. "Is there a problem here?" Leona explained, presenting her boarding pass. Patrice glanced at it, then at Grant, then back at Leona. "We're going to move you to economy. Company guidelines." For a second, the words didn't seem to belong in the air. They were spoken as if final, as if the matter was already decided. The aisle was quiet around them, passengers watching without watching. Leona weighed her options in that breath. She could demand. She could refuse to move. But she knew something Patrice did not. Her influence did not end with this seat. Sometimes it was better to let the pattern write itself before you pointed to the ink. "If that's the arrangement, please document that this reassignment is involuntary, and note which policy you're applying," Leona said. Patrice hesitated. "Cabin discretion," she replied, the phrase flat and thin. Leona nodded once. "Understood." Patrice gestured toward the curtain. "This way." The walk to row 34 was longer than it needed to be, not because of distance, but because of the feeling. The narrow aisle became a kind of stage, each step carrying her past rows of passengers who had seen just enough to form their own quiet judgments. Some looked down at their screens. Others met her eyes for a moment, then away. In 34B, a man with large elbows and a podcast turned up too loud occupied the aisle seat. The woman by the window had ink smudges on her fingers and a paperback open. She looked up and offered a small, rueful smile. "I'm Samantha," she said, her voice low. "That wasn't right. It will be addressed," Leona answered, sliding her bag under the seat. Her tone was steady, the same one she used in boardrooms when a decision went against her, but the meeting wasn't over. Samantha nodded once, as if they shared an understanding. Leona powered up her laptop. The tapping of keys blended with the hum of the engines and the soft thud of overhead bins closing. She began to write, not with heat, but with precision. Names, times, exact words. Who stood where? What was said? The outline of a story was already forming, one she intended to tell in the right room, at the right time. The captain's voice came over the intercom with pre-flight announcements. Outside. The rain streaked sideways across the oval windows. Somewhere forward. Patrice's voice rose lightly as she offered champagne to the passengers in business class. The sound did not reach row 34. Leona kept typing. The engines hummed low while passengers found their places. Leona sat upright in row 34, the thin fabric headrest pressing lightly against her shoulders. The space felt smaller already. She could hear the rustle of magazines up front, the muted pop of champagne corks. Business class was separated by a curtain, but its presence was more than fabric. It was a barrier in tone, in attention, in the kind of welcome people received. She glanced down at her boarding pass again. The bold print was still there. 5C, business. It hadn't changed. What had changed was the decision someone made to treat it like an option rather than a right. Up front, Patrice Colburn leaned over Grant Holloway, laughing at something he said. Grant reclined a little, one leg stretched out. He looked like he had settled into a seat he'd been promised, even if it wasn't promised to him. Leona's fingers rested on her keyboard. She could almost feel the weight of the hours ahead. 11 hours in the air. 11 hours to see what else unfolded. The calm inside her wasn't the absence of anger. It was the steady presence of choice. She knew her own thresholds, and she knew this was the beginning, not the end. The overhead lights dimmed to a soft amber as the last passengers boarded. The aisle filled with the movement of people stowing bags and removing coats. She felt the bump of someone's shoulder as a man passed by, apologizing without looking back. Samantha Rojas gave her a sympathetic glance, then returned to her book. From the galley came the scent of brewed coffee, but no cart rolled toward them yet. In business class. Patrice's voice floated over the curtain, offering a menu choice, describing wine pairings. The tone was warm, even indulgent. Leona listened for any sign that the same attention might travel to the back. It didn't. Owen Park, a younger flight attendant with dark hair and quick, careful movements, came down the aisle, offering water to those who hadn't brought their own drinks. He stopped at Leona's row. His eyes flicked to her boarding pass on the tray table, and then to her face. The pause was short, but noticeable. "Water for you," he asked. "Yes, thank you." His voice was quieter when he added, "I saw what happened earlier." Leona met his gaze for a fraction of a second. "Then you know why I'm taking notes." He gave a barely perceptible nod before moving on, the cart squeaking as it rolled toward the back. Leona opened a fresh page on her laptop. She typed the time, the detail about Owen's acknowledgement, the contrast in service tones between cabins. She wrote as she always did when documenting factual, precise, free from adjectives that could be argued away. The intercom crackled again. Patrice's voice announced a reminder to remain seated as they prepared for taxi. Her words were clipped now, businesslike, as if she had moved into a different register for a different audience. Leona noted the shift. The plane pushed back from the gate, the low rumble of movement filling the cabin. The safety demonstration played on screens overhead. Passengers half watched, half scrolled through their phones. Leona fastened her belt, her mind dividing between the routine of departure and the calculation of how to proceed. The decision to stay quiet in that first moment had been deliberate. Confrontation too early could limit what she could observe, but she also knew there was a risk the longer she stayed silent. The more others might think her silence meant acceptance. The plane taxied toward the runway. Rain streaked across the oval windows in quick diagonal lines. The engines deepened in tone, and a moment later, the force of takeoff pressed her gently back into the seat. The cabin tilted upward, lights of the city below blurred into patterns of gold and red. As the climb leveled and the seatbelt sign went off, Patrice emerged from behind the curtain. She walked slowly through the business section, checking on each passenger, bending close to speak, smiling when she heard something amusing. At Grant's seat, she rested a hand lightly on the headrest as they spoke. She poured him another glass of champagne before moving on. When she reached row 10, she turned and returned to the galley without stepping into economy. The curtain swayed briefly, then settled back into place. No one in the rows behind received so much as a glance. Leona noted it all. Samantha leaned slightly toward her. "Do they ever check on this section?" "Not unless they have to," Leona said. "I've flown this route before." Same thing happened to another woman last spring, Samantha said quietly. She wasn't in business to start with, but I remember thinking the tone changed depending on who they were talking to. Leona's mind clicked on the detail. Repeat patterns were valuable. They turned single events into evidence of a norm. Would you be willing to share that in writing later? She asked. Yes. I think I would. The first drink service for economy began. Owen returned with a tray of small cups and a bottle of sparkling water. He poured carefully, his attention equal for each passenger. When he reached Leona, he hesitated again, as if deciding whether to say more. He didn't, but his eyes carried a message awareness, maybe even quiet support. As she sipped, Leona opened her calendar. 11 hours to London meant at least 2 opportunities to interact with the crew in a way that could reveal more. She planned to use both. Up front, Grant leaned back, flipping through emails on his phone. He glanced toward the curtain once, then smirked, like someone watching from the right side of a barrier. Leona's mind wandered briefly to the presentation she would give in London. The stakes were high there, but different. That was a matter of market share and product rollout. This was about something that didn't fit neatly into a slide deck: respect, equity, and the structures that failed to deliver them. The meal carts began their slow journey down the aisle. In business, choice was offered from a menu. In economy, options were simply announced. Owen served her row, chicken or pasta. She chose pasta. When the tray arrived, she noticed the sauce had shifted, a small smear on the edge of the dish. She dabbed it with a napkin, noting the difference in presentation. As the cabin settled into the quiet of meal service, she leaned back slightly. The glow from the screen in front of her lit her hands as she typed. She recorded the service order, the tone, the physical differences between what she'd seen in business and what was given here. Her notes were becoming a map, each point connected by a line of behavior. Somewhere ahead, Patrice laughed again, her voice carrying just far enough to be heard, but not enough to catch the words. Leona glanced at the time. 40 minutes into the flight. Still hours to go. She closed her laptop for a moment and looked out the window past Samantha's shoulder. Above the clouds, the rain was gone, replaced by the calm expanse of morning sky. She let the quiet steady her. The situation was unfolding, and she would be ready when the time came to act. She wasn't just a passenger displaced from a seat. She was a witness to the choices being made in real time, and she intended to make sure those choices were seen by more than the people who made them. The cabin lights settled into a low, warm glow as the first round of meal trays were collected. The quiet after the bustle had its own weight. Conversations thinned to a low murmur, the drone of the engines filling the space between words. Leona leaned back slightly. Her laptop closed for the moment, her mind replaying each detail from the past hour. She had been moved without choice. She had documented the moment, and now she was watching the subtle ways the crew navigated between cabins. Every pass through the curtain was a chance to see the invisible lines drawn in the air. Samantha sipped from her paper cup and glanced at her. "I've been thinking about what you said," she whispered. "About addressing it later." Leona turned her head, her expression open but measured. "If you put your name on something, it has weight, but it also has risk. I don't expect anyone to do that unless they're ready." Samantha nodded. "I get that. I teach high school. I know about risk." The faintest smile crossed Leona's face. "What do you teach English?" "Mostly American literature." "Then you understand narratives." Samantha tilted her head. "And what's the story here?" Leona's eyes drifted briefly toward the curtain. That's what we're finding out. Up front. Patrice appeared again, this time moving briskly toward the rear galley. She passed Leona without a glance, but Leona noticed the quick exchange of words with Owen as they crossed paths. Owen's shoulders stiffened, his eyes flicking toward row 34 for a fraction of a second. It was a look Leona had seen before. Someone being told to be careful. Someone already aware of the pressure on them. She made a note in her phone under the running timeline. The scent of coffee reached them again, this time stronger. Owen emerged from the galley holding a tray with fresh cups. He moved quietly down the aisle, offering refills. When he reached Leona's row, his voice dropped just enough to be private. "We don't usually have many in-flight issues this early," he said, pouring the coffee, "but today feels different." Leona met his eyes. Different can mean opportunity. He gave the smallest nod before continuing on. She held the warm cup between her hands for a moment before setting it in the tray. The heat grounded her, brought her back to the here and now. The temptation to confront, to demand immediate correction, was strong, but she reminded herself of the bigger arc. A single argument could be dismissed. A documented pattern could not. Samantha shifted in her seat, pulling a sweater from her bag. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why didn't you just refuse to move?" Leona thought about the question before answering. "Because refusing would have been about my seat. This is about every seat like mine. And that requires a record." Samantha let out a slow breath, as if she'd been holding it. "That makes sense." The seatbelt sign chimed on. A slight bump rocked the cabin as the plane met a pocket of rough air. Patrice's voice came over the intercom, reminding everyone to remain seated. The tone was neutral, stripped of the warmth she'd used earlier in business class. As the turbulence eased, Leona opened her laptop again. She added the coffee service to the notes, marking Owen's quiet remark, Patrice's quick glance. She noted Samantha's observation about prior incidents on the same route. Each piece was small, but together they built a structure. She was halfway through her notes when a voice from the row behind interrupted her rhythm. "Excuse me, miss. Could you switch seats with my wife, Leona?" Turned to see a man gesturing toward a middle seat beside him. His wife, a woman with tired eyes, smiled politely. "I'm sorry. I have work to finish and this seat suits it better," Leona replied. The man's smile thinned. "Just thought I'd ask," he said, his tone suggesting it wasn't just a casual request. Samantha shot Leona a look that said more than words. "This is what I mean," she murmured when the man turned away. "Some people assume they can just shift you around." Leona typed another line into her notes. "Voluntary seat change requested without need, declined." The hours stretched on, each small interaction adding another thread. Patrice remained almost entirely in the forward cabin, while Owen did most of the work in economy. The difference in approach was hard to miss. Business class passengers had plates collected promptly, wine glasses topped without asking. In the back, call buttons lit and stayed lit for several minutes before anyone arrived. About halfway through the flight, Leona noticed a commotion a few rows ahead. A man was speaking to a flight attendant in a raised voice. "I ordered a vegetarian meal," he said. "It's not here." The attendant, a young man with an apologetic smile, explained that they had run out. The man gestured toward his seatmate, who was already eating a vegetarian entree. "He didn't order one," the passenger said, his voice tight. Leona leaned slightly to see. The seatmate avoided eye contact, focusing on his meal. "Sir, lower your voice. the attendant said. Leona checked the time and typed row 27. Vegetarian meal not honored for passenger of color. Delivered instead to non-requesting white passenger. Passenger asked to lower voice when questioning. The pattern was no longer just about her. It was stretching across the cabin. Samantha noticed her typing. This isn't just about you anymore. Is it? It never was, Leona said. The lights dimmed further as the cabin moved into the overnight portion of the flight. Window shades were drawn, and the hum of the engines deepened. Most passengers settled into their seats with eye masks and blankets. Leona kept her screen brightness low, her fingers moving steadily. She knew she was collecting more than a list. She was building the frame of a case, one that could not be undone by denial or diluted by vague apologies. Hours from London. She saved the file and closed her laptop. She leaned back, allowing herself a rare moment to simply sit. Her eyes closed, but her mind stayed alert, cataloging every sound, every pause in service, every subtle decision that shaped the journey for those in her section of the plane. The walk to row 34 had been more than a relocation. It had been an entry point. The stage was set, the players revealed, and the curtain only half drawn. The rest of the story would unfold before the wheels touched the runway. And when it did, she would be ready. The steady drone of the engines made it hard to tell how much time had passed. In the low light of the overnight cabin, the space felt almost suspended in time, yet every detail stood out to Leona. She had learned to watch for patterns in small moments. Bias didn't always shout. It often whispered, hoping to pass unnoticed. A soft chime broke the stillness as the seatbelt sign turned off. Somewhere in the front, Patrice's voice floated through the speakers, informing business class that a mid-flight snack service would be starting shortly. Her tone was warm, even playful. Here in economy, no such announcement came. Instead, Owen emerged quietly from the galley with a tray of water and juice. No offer of the gourmet cheese plates or warm pastries she could hear being described up front. Leona noted the time. She also noted the body language of the passengers around her. Those in the rear cabins adjusted to lower expectations without complaint, as though the difference in treatment was simply the order of things. Samantha shifted beside her, pulling off her eye mask. "What did I miss?" "They're serving snacks in business class," Leona said. "And back here, water and juice." Samantha's brow furrowed. "And nobody says a thing." "It's not that they don't notice," Leona replied. "It's that they expect it. That's how patterns survive." A sudden metallic rattle came from the forward galley. Leona looked up just in time to see Patrice step into business class again. Leaning over a passenger's seat to hand him a plate of something steaming, her smile was wide, her posture relaxed. It was the kind of interaction that made people feel valued, seen. The curtain swayed once more, and Patrice disappeared from view. Owen returned down the aisle a few minutes later. He stopped at row 34, glancing toward Leona's notes. "Would you like some crackers or fruit?" he asked. "Fruit. Thank you," as he handed her a small plastic-wrapped package. His eyes flicked briefly toward the curtain. She could tell he was aware of the gap in service. He just couldn't say it out loud. Not yet. Leona placed the packet on her tray without opening it. The difference wasn't about the food. It was about the message. The cabin settled again. A man in row 32 raised his hand to get an attendant's attention. When no one responded, he stood and approached the galley. A moment later, he returned with nothing. "They said the snacks are for business class only," he muttered to his seatmate. His voice carried just far enough for Leona to hear. She added it to the log. The hours crept forward. Some passengers slept, heads tilted awkwardly against the window. Others watched movies with earbuds in. Leona kept scanning the space, noting who received what and when. It wasn't long before another instance surfaced. A passenger across the aisle pressed the call button. After several minutes, Owen appeared. "Could I have a blanket?" the passenger asked. "I'm sorry. We're out in economy." Leona's eyes narrowed. She had seen a stack of blankets in the front galley earlier. She made a mental note to verify if more were available. Later, as Owen passed through again, she asked for one herself. His hesitation told her everything before he even spoke. "I'll check," he said, and returned a minute later with a neatly folded blanket. "Thank you," she said, watching the flicker of understanding in his eyes. Samantha leaned over slightly. What was that about? They had blankets after all. Leona said, so they just didn't give it to the other guy. Apparently not. The pattern was becoming undeniable. It wasn't just her treatment at boarding. It was a series of small decisions, each one favoring some and disregarding others. And those decisions weren't random. A few rows ahead, a mother with a young child tried to flag down help when her seatback screen froze. The attendant told her it would have to wait until after service. Leona glanced toward the front, where Patrice was personally resetting a passenger's entertainment system in business class. By now, the rhythm of the flight was clear. Extra care flowed in one direction. Minimal service trickled in the other. As she typed, the clink of glassware reached her from beyond the curtain. Patrice's laugh followed, warm and confident. The sound barely crossed into economy, but it was enough to remind Leona of where the boundaries were drawn. She paused, fingers resting on the keyboard. There was a choice ahead. She could continue silently collecting, or she could start shifting the dynamic now. But shifting too soon might close off the chance to see the full picture. Samantha interrupted her thoughts. "I keep thinking about your seat." "What about it? I wonder if they even gave him your meal." Leona's jaw tightened. "We'll find out." The opportunity came sooner than expected. An attendant wheeled the cart down the aisle, offering another round of drinks. In the gap between rows, Leona saw Patrice step into the rear galley to speak to Owen. Their voices were low, but Patrice's posture was tense, her arms folded. Owen nodded quickly, then returned to pouring drinks. When he reached Leona's row, his voice dropped again. "They just asked me to make sure you're comfortable," he said, almost under his breath. "Comfortable?" "Yes. I think they've realized who you are." Leona smiled faintly. And who is that Owen didn't answer? But the small lift of his eyebrows said enough. She opened her laptop again, adding the exchange to her notes. If they were starting to connect the dots, she would let them. Sometimes awareness created its own shift. A few minutes later, Patrice herself appeared, carrying a tray with a fresh cup of coffee and a small dessert. "We'd like you to have this," she said. Leona looked at the tray, then up at Patrice. "I'll stay with what I've been given. The record should match reality." Patrice blinked once before forcing a smile. "Of course." As she walked away, Samantha whispered, "That was ice cold." "Not ice," Leona said quietly. "Just clarity." The plane hummed on through the darkness, each mile bringing them closer to London. But for Leona, the destination wasn't the city or the meeting waiting there. It was the moment when the pattern she'd documented could no longer be ignored. She closed her laptop and folded her hands in her lap. The evidence was building. Soon, the next step would be clear. The hum of the cabin had shifted into something more restless. Passengers were moving in their seats, stretching, whispering to one another. A faint glow from the galley spilled into the aisle, catching the silver trim of overhead bins. Leona sat in 34B, her laptop closed now, hands resting lightly on her thighs. She had enough to act, but there was still the question of timing. Samantha had drifted into a light doze beside her, her head turned toward the window. Leona let her rest. The work ahead would be quieter if not everyone around her was watching her every move. Patrice appeared again at the front of economy. She wasn't carrying a tray this time. Instead, she was scanning the rows, her eyes catching briefly on Leona before she stepped forward with the same kind of formal smile she'd worn at boarding. "Dr. Marshall," she said, voice just loud enough for the nearby passengers to hear. "I wanted to see if you needed anything to make your flight more comfortable." Leona met her gaze. "I need you to deliver a message to the captain." Patrice blinked, not expecting that. "I'm sorry. That won't be possible while we're in flight." Leona reached calmly into the side pocket of her bag and pulled out a small white case. From it, she withdrew a card, heavy stock, embossed lettering, the kind that made a statement without having to say a word. She held it out between two fingers. Patrice hesitated before taking it. Her eyes moved over the raised print. "Dr. Leona Marshall, Chief Executive Officer, Orion Global Systems." The change in her expression was instant, though she tried to hide it. Her shoulders squared, her voice softer now. "What would you like me to tell him? Please inform Captain Ford that Dr. Leona Marshall, board member of Skyreach Aviation Group, requests a brief conversation at the first safe opportunity." Patrice's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. "Of course. I'll pass the message right away." Leona nodded once, then watched her turn, moving with more stiffness than before. A man in the aisle seat 2 rows up leaned slightly to watch her go. He had seen the exchange, and he was curious. That curiosity was about to spread. Within minutes, Owen appeared, standing just beside her row. "Dr. Marshall, the captain has received your message. He says he'll have his first officer speak with you shortly." "Thank you, Owen." As he moved on, Samantha stirred, rubbing her eyes. "Did something happen?" "We're about to see," Leona said. The curtain at the front of economy shifted, and a woman in a crisp uniform stepped through. She was tall, with dark hair pulled neatly back, and a small set of pilot's wings pinned to her shirt. "Dr. Marshall," she said, offering her hand. "I'm First Officer Kelly Monroe. Captain Ford asked me to speak with you." Leona shook her hand firmly. "Thank you for coming back here." Monroe glanced at the rows around them, then back to Leona. "I understand there was an issue with your seating." "There have been multiple issues," Leona replied. "I've documented each one with timestamps, descriptions, and the names of the crew involved." Monroe's brows drew together slightly. "That's thorough." "It's necessary," Leona said. "This isn't about my comfort. It's about an operational culture that allows these patterns to repeat." Monroe nodded slowly. "I'll inform the captain directly." As the first officer left, the eyes of several passengers followed her. Word was already moving through the cabin, a ripple of attention that shifted the energy in the air. Patrice reappeared within 10 minutes, her voice softer now, almost deferential. "We can move you back to your original seat in business class." Leona looked at her evenly. "I'll stay where you put me. The record should match reality." Patrice's smile froze for half a beat before she nodded and left. Samantha leaned closer, her voice low. "They're worried." "They should be," Leona said. From that moment on, the tone toward her changed. Owen checked in twice more in the next hour. A fresh bottle of water appeared on her tray without request. But she noted each gesture, aware of its timing. Grant Holloway had heard enough whispers by now to turn in his seat and glance back toward row 34. His eyes met Leona's for an instant before he looked away, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. Leona let the moment pass without expression. She wasn't here for personal satisfaction. She was here for accountability. By the time the flight began its slow descent toward London, the atmosphere had shifted entirely. Patrice's once brisk movements in business class were now measured, deliberate. Owen moved through the economy cabin with more frequency, and every time the curtain opened, it seemed to hang a little longer before falling closed again. When the seatbelt sign came on for landing, Samantha tucked away her book. "So, what happens when we get there?" Leona smoothed her blazer. "When we get there, the real work begins." The landing was smooth, the plane gliding onto the wet tarmac of Heathrow under a pale morning sky. Passengers reached for their bags, the aisles filling with the shuffle of movement. Patrice approached one last time. "Dr. Marshall, the captain has arranged for you to be escorted off the aircraft first. I'll deplane with my row," Leona said calmly. "People should see what happened." Patrice hesitated, then stepped back. As the door opened, the air of the terminal spilled in cool, with the faint scent of jet fuel. And there, just beyond the threshold, stood a cluster of suits, their expressions set, their posture ready for whatever came next. The first move had been made. The rest was waiting beyond the jet bridge. The line to deplane moved slowly, a shuffling rhythm of travelers adjusting backpacks and checking phones. From her seat in row 34, Leona could see the door ahead framed by the edge of the curtain. The business class passengers were already stepping into the jet bridge, their shoes clicking softly against the threshold. The scent of rain from the tarmac drifted into the cabin. Samantha nudged her gently. "Those people outside, they're here for you, aren't they?" Leona didn't answer directly. "They're here for what happened," she said. When their row reached the front, she stepped into the aisle and waited her turn. Owen was by the galley, offering a faint nod as she passed. There was understanding in his eyes, and maybe a little relief. First Officer Kelly Monroe stood just inside the jet bridge. She had removed her headset and cap, her posture as precise as it had been in the cockpit. "Dr. Marshall, Captain Ford asked me to walk you out." Leona met her handshake with the same steady grip as before. "Thank you." They walked side by side into the brighter light of the terminal. The air here was cooler, edged with the faint hum of distant announcements. Just beyond the security line, a group of men and women in dark suits waited. One man stepped forward tall, broad-shouldered, his expression unreadable. "Dr. Marshall, I'm Victor Langston, chairman of Sky Reach Aviation Group." Leona inclined her head. "Mr. Langston." With him was another man, slightly shorter, his tie a half-shade too bright for the rest of his suit. "Howard McKinney." "Coo," Langston said. McKinney extended a hand, but his eyes darted toward the small crowd of passengers watching from the arrival gate. His grip was quick, almost perfunctory. "We'd like to speak with you immediately." Langston continued, "There's a conference room upstairs." Leona glanced back toward the gate, where Samantha stood watching. "I have time now," she said. They moved through the terminal, the group forming an unspoken barrier around her as if shielding her from cameras. The meeting room they entered was glass-walled, with a view over the busy gates below. Rain streaked the panes, blurring the outlines of planes taxiing to their positions. Langston gestured to a chair at the head of the table. "Please, sit." Leona remained standing for a moment. "I'd like to begin by saying this isn't a personal grievance. This is a governance matter." McKinney shifted in his seat. "We understand there was a seating issue. A seating reassignment without cause," Leona said evenly, "and a series of service discrepancies that followed. I have documented every instance with times, descriptions, and the crew members involved." She placed her laptop on the table, the screen already open to a document filled with precise entries, names, quotes, seat numbers. Langston leaned forward. "You've been keeping a record since boarding." "Yes. And I've identified at least 7 incidents that demonstrate biased discretion in service delivery." McKinney's mouth tightened. "You're saying this is systemic. I'm saying it is measurable," Leona replied. "And I will be recommending structural changes to ensure it cannot happen again." Langston's gaze stayed steady. "What changes?" "A passenger equity charter. Clear. Enforceable rules for when a seat can be reassigned only for safety. And any exception must be documented in real time. Independent oversight with access to raw data, not summaries, regular bias audits by route and station, and tying leadership bonuses to measurable improvements in equity metrics." McKinney leaned back, exhaling sharply. "That's ambitious. Less ambitious than defending lawsuits," Leona said. "Less costly than losing public trust." Langston looked at her for a long moment. "You're not asking?" "I'm not," Leona said. "I'm telling you what it will take for this company to meet the standard it claims to uphold." There was a silence, broken only by the soft hum of the air system. Below, through the rain-streaked glass, another aircraft pushed back from a gate, its tail fading into the mist. Langston finally nodded. "We'll review your documentation in detail. And when you do, I expect a public statement within 24 hours, Leona said. "Acknowledgement, accountability, and immediate interim measures." McKinney opened his mouth, but Langston lifted a hand. "We'll get it done." Leona closed her laptop. "Then we can proceed." As the meeting ended, Monroe reappeared at the door. "Dr. Marshall, the captain asked me to pass along his personal apology. Tell him I appreciate the acknowledgement," Leona said, "but the work now is in the repair. In the elevator down to the arrivals level." Langston spoke quietly. "You understand this will make waves. Waves are just wind meeting water," Leona said. "The question is whether you ride them or capsize." They reached the arrivals hall. Passengers from her flight were still collecting luggage. A few glanced her way, their expressions curious. Samantha stood near the carousel, her bag at her feet. "Everything okay?" she asked as Leona approached. "For now," Leona said. "But the story's just getting started." Samantha smiled faintly. "I'd like to hear the rest when it's ready." "You will," Leona promised. They parted at the taxi stand, the mist in the air settling on her blazer. She stepped into a waiting car, the city stretching out ahead, wet streets glistening under a pale London morning. Somewhere behind her, the terminal carried on departures, arrivals, the quiet hum of an industry built on movement. She knew the next steps wouldn't be quiet, but for now, she let the calm hold, the way the sea is calm just before the tide turns. London morning had its own kind of gray. The light was soft, but without warmth, clouds stretching low over the runway. The rain had slowed to a fine mist, just enough to coat the glass of the terminal and blur the lines of the waiting aircraft. Leona stepped out of the car and into the covered entrance of the Skyreach Aviation Group's Heathrow offices. 2 security staff greeted her without a word, guiding her through a quiet side entrance. The main lobby was wide and spare, a wall of muted monitors showing arrivals, departures, and weather patterns across the network. Her shoes made almost no sound on the polished stone floor. A receptionist with a clipped British accent asked for her name. Before she could finish, Victor Langston appeared from a glass corridor to the right, his presence filling the space. "Dr. Marshall, thank you for coming on such short notice. This isn't about timing," Leona said. "It's about priority." He gestured for her to follow. The conference suite upstairs had been prepared, the long table already set with water glasses, notepads, and a single thick folder at each seat. Several faces turned toward her as she entered. She recognized none of them, but the nameplates were clear operations, legal, human resources, public relations. Howard McKinney sat halfway down the table, his tie today a dark navy instead of the bright shade from earlier. He gave a tight nod. Nothing more. Langston took the head seat. "Before we begin, let me be clear. This is an internal governance session. Dr. Marshall has raised concerns supported by extensive documentation. We are here to address them now, before they become a matter for the public." The head of operations, a man named Richard Voss, spoke first. "I've reviewed the incident summaries. If accurate, these point to a systemic service imbalance along both racial and class lines." Leona opened her laptop and turned the screen toward the table. "They are accurate, time-stamped, cross-verified by multiple passenger statements." The head of HR, a woman with a silver pin on her lapel, tapped the folder in front of her. "The crew logs for that flight make no mention of any seating reassignment due to policy. The entry for the change is marked as passenger request." "That's false," Leona said evenly. "I never requested a seat change. That misclassification is part of the problem. The paperwork becomes a shield for bad decisions." PR's director leaned forward. "We'll need to be prepared for the possibility of media involvement. This is the kind of story that moves fast online, especially with your name attached." "My name is not the issue," Leona replied. "The issue is whether passengers of color receive the same treatment and rights as others on your aircraft." McKinney spoke for the first time. "You're implying this is widespread?" "I'm stating it," Leona said, "and unless addressed at the structural level, it will continue." The room was quiet for a beat. Langston glanced at McKinney before speaking. "What's your proposal?" Leona outlined it again. This time with specifics: a passenger equity charter to be embedded into company policy, seat reassignment only for safety, with real-time documentation accessible to oversight, mandatory bias and equity training for all crew, tied to performance metrics, quarterly public reporting on equity compliance, an independent oversight council with access to raw operational data. Richard Voss leaned back. "That's a substantial shift from current practice. It's less than what will be required if you wait for public pressure," Leona said. Langston's voice was measured. "And you want this in place immediately. I want interim measures in place before the end of the day. The full structure can be implemented within 6 months." The legal counsel at the far end of the table spoke quietly. "We'll also need to consider contract implications with the crew unions." "Then consider them," Leona said. "Equity is not optional." McKinney's jaw tightened. "You realize this level of oversight will alter how our crews operate on a daily basis." "That's the point," Leona said. Langston closed his folder. "All right. We'll convene again this afternoon to finalize the interim plan. In the meantime, HR will begin collecting all prior complaints matching the pattern Dr. Marshall has documented. Operations will audit the last 12 months of seating reassignments and meal service discrepancies. PR will prepare a holding statement acknowledging an internal review is underway." As the meeting adjourned, McKinney stayed seated. Langston waited until the others had left before turning to him. Howard, you'll need to lead the operations audit personally. McKinney nodded, his eyes still on Leona. Understood. When they stepped back into the corridor, Langston slowed his pace. You've just put this company on a collision course with itself. Leona met his gaze. If the course was sound, it wouldn't feel like a collision. Downstairs, in the main lobby, several employees glanced up from their desks as she passed. A few held her eyes for a moment longer than necessary, as if measuring the weight of her presence. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the air was still heavy with it. A car waited at the curb to take her to her hotel. As she stepped inside, she saw Samantha Rojas leaning against a pillar near the entrance. I didn't expect to see you here, Leona said. I had a layover, Samantha replied. Thought I'd stay and see what happens. Leona smiled faintly. Then you might get a front row seat. The driver pulled away from the curb, the city unfolding beyond the window. For now. The day felt balanced between what had happened and what was about to happen. The next hours would decide which way it would tip. By mid-afternoon, the conference room felt smaller, the air thick with the weight of unspoken stakes. Outside the glass walls, Heathrow moved in its usual rhythm, boarding calls and gate changes flowing like a constant background hum. Inside, the table was lined again with the same faces from the morning session, joined now by a few new ones from compliance and finance. Victor Langston opened the meeting without preamble. We've had enough time to review the initial materials. Today is about decisions. Leona sat straight in her chair, her laptop open and ready. She had not come to negotiate the validity of her documentation. She had come to ensure it could not be ignored. Howard McKinney looked more guarded than before. His folder was thick with printed reports, but his hands rested on top of it as though keeping something contained. The head of compliance, a woman named Denise Albright, spoke first. I've cross-checked Dr. Marshall's notes with available crew schedules and service logs. Several entries in the official record conflict with her account in ways that conveniently protect the crew from fault. That's exactly why outside oversight is necessary, Leona said. Internal documentation can be shaped to protect the system rather than reveal it. Finance's representative cleared his throat. Implementing what you're proposing will require budget reallocations, data infrastructure for real-time reporting, expanded training modules, compensation structures. These are not minor costs. Less than settling a discrimination suit every quarter, Leona replied, her voice calm. Less than the loss in brand value from eroded trust? Langston gestured toward her. Walk us through your proposed structure again, but include the sequencing. Leona projected a simple chart on the screen. Phase 1. Immediate interim measures. Public acknowledgement of internal review. Clear directive to all crews, no involuntary seat reassignments except for safety. Documented in real time. Temporary escalation protocol for any service dispute involving bias allegations. Phase 2, structural reforms within 6 months. Implementation of the Passenger Equity Charter. Automated audit system linked to passenger data and crew logs. Quarterly public equity reports by route and station. Independent Oversight Council with unrestricted access to operational data. Phase 3. Cultural integration. Bias and equity training tied to crew and leadership performance reviews. Leadership bonuses linked directly to equity metrics. Annual public forum to review progress and update policy. She let the silence hold for a moment after finishing. Richard Voss leaned forward. The technology build for Phase 2 could start immediately if we reassign some IT capacity from the loyalty program overhaul. McKinney shifted in his seat. That would delay the loyalty program relaunch by a year. Langston's voice was even. So we trade a marketing upgrade for operational integrity. I can live with that. Denise from compliance added, If the loyalty program is designed to retain customers, equity in service is a better retention tool than any reward points. PR's director spoke next. If we go public with this before the review is complete, we run the risk of exposing the company to criticism before we have results. Leona's gaze was steady. Waiting only increases the gap between harm and repair. You don't protect your reputation by hiding. From what happened, you protect it by acting visibly to correct it. Langston nodded slowly. The holding statement will go out tonight. McKinney exhaled, leaning back. What about crew contracts? The unions will push back on the Oversight Council's authority. Then bring them into the design, Leona said. If they value fair treatment for all passengers, they'll have a seat at the table. Denise tapped her pen against her notes. I'd also recommend a retroactive review of the past 2 years' service complaint data. See if the pattern Dr. Marshall identified matches previous incidents. Leona agreed. Patterns matter because they tell you it's not about one person or one day. It's about a culture. Langston looked around the table. Unless anyone here has an objection, they're prepared to defend publicly. We'll move forward on all 3 phases. McKinney didn't speak. No one else did either. Then it's settled. Langston said, HR operations, compliance, and PR meet with Dr. Marshall after this session to align on immediate steps. Finance start drafting the budget adjustment. The meeting shifted into rapid logistics. Dates were set, responsibilities assigned. Leona listened, intervening only when the specifics risked diluting the intent. She had learned that policy could be undermined not just by opposition, but by slow erosion in the details. When it was done, Langston closed his folder with a soft thud. Dr. Marshall, I think you've just written a part of this company's history. Leona shut her laptop. History is only worth writing if it changes the next chapter. As they filed out, McKinney lingered near the door. His voice was low when he spoke to her. You've made powerful allies today, but also powerful enemies. Leona met his eyes. Enemies of equity are enemies worth having. Outside the conference room, the day had shifted. The rain had stopped, and late afternoon light filtered through the glass. Employees moved through the hallways with a purposeful energy, some glancing at her with a mix of curiosity and quiet respect. Samantha was waiting in the lobby, holding 2 cups of coffee. I figured you could use one, she said. Leona accepted it with a smile. You figured right. How'd it go? Better than it might have. Worse than it should have. Samantha raised an eyebrow. Which means, it means the work is just starting. They stepped out into the cooler air together. Cars pulled up and pulled away from the curb in a constant cycle. Somewhere overhead, a plane climbed into the sky, its engines fading into the distance. Leona sipped her coffee. The day wasn't over, but the path ahead was clearer. The choice had been made to act. Now it would be a matter of making sure the promises held. By the next morning, the story had already slipped the walls of the conference room. It started with a passenger in row 27 who had quietly recorded the vegetarian meal dispute and posted it to a travel forum. Within hours, a travel blogger with a large following had picked it up, pairing the clip with a few lines about unequal skies. Leona was in her hotel room overlooking the Thames when Samantha called. Have you seen it yet? She asked. Seen what's your flight? It's online. Leona opened her laptop, navigating to the link Samantha sent. There was the clip, a calm passenger explaining that he had pre-ordered a meal, an attendant telling him it wasn't available, and the silent cut to his seatmate eating the same meal without having requested it. The comments were already piling up, full of speculation, outrage, and the occasional defense of the airline. It wasn't about her directly, but it didn't need to be. The moment captured the imbalance she had been documenting. By mid-morning, 3 more posts appeared on social media from other passengers on the flight, each one sharing a small detail: the seating reassignment, the lack of service in economy, the tone differences between cabins. Together, they formed a pattern. Even the casual observer could see. At Skyreach headquarters, Langston's phone was lighting up with calls from board members. By noon, a journalist from a major London paper was waiting in the lobby, seeking comment. PR had issued the holding statement as planned, but the phrasing "reviewing internal processes" wasn't enough to stop the speculation. Leona arrived at headquarters just after 1. She could feel the shift in the air as she walked through the lobby. Conversations paused when she passed, and more than one staffer glanced at the phone in their hand, no doubt scrolling through the coverage. Langston met her in his office. "The story's out," he said, sliding a printed copy of the newspaper across the desk. The headline read, "Bias at 30,000 feet beneath a still image from one of the passenger videos. It was always going to get out." Leona said, "The question is how you respond." McKinney entered without knocking, holding a tablet. "We're trending across 3 major platforms. Investor calls are starting." "Then you need to show them action," Leona said. "If you let this drift, you'll be reacting to someone else's narrative instead of leading with your own." Langston looked between them. "The interim measures go live today. I want HR to brief every crew before they step on an aircraft. No exceptions." McKinney hesitated. "We haven't finalized the Oversight Council structure." "That's phase 2, Leona reminded him. "Today is about stopping the harm." PR joined the meeting, laying out a list of journalists requesting interviews. Langston shook his head. "We stick to one statement until the initial review is complete. Then make it one worth saying." Leona replied, "The public wants clarity, not platitudes." McKinney's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, frowning. "Grant Holloway's company just called. They've seen the reports. He's been placed on leave pending their own review." Leona absorbed the news without reaction. Consequences will fall where they belong. But don't let this become about one man's seat. By late afternoon, the employee intranet lit up with the official memo, effective immediately. Involuntary seat reassignments are prohibited except for documented safety concerns. Any such reassignment requires on-the-spot notation accessible to the Oversight Review Team. Crews are instructed to maintain equitable service standards across all cabins. The memo included Leona's name as an advisor to the review process. That alone sent a quiet ripple through the ranks. Crew members began emailing HR with their own accounts, some confirming her observations, others offering examples from entirely different routes. That evening, Samantha called again. "My students found the story. They want to know if you're going to make the airline change." Leona smiled faintly into the phone. "Tell them change isn't a promise. It's a practice." She ended the call and turned to the window. London's skyline was lit now, the river catching the glow in long streaks of gold. Below, traffic moved in a slow current. She thought about the passengers on flights still in the air at that moment, moving between places without realizing the policies shaping their experience had shifted that very day. The next morning brought another round of developments. PR had scheduled a joint press conference for the following week, with Langston, Leona, and the head of HR present. A handful of former passengers had already agreed to participate in a listening session. Meanwhile, crew unions requested meetings to discuss the new measures. McKinney was tasked with leading those talks. His expression when the assignment came was neutral, but Leona could read the tension in the set of his jaw. In the days that followed, more passengers came forward online. One described being moved from an exit row without explanation. Another shared a story about a language barrier being used as a reason to deny a meal preference. Each post was another stitch in the larger picture. Investors were watching too. An analyst note circulated, suggesting that while short-term turbulence was likely, the long-term impact of the reforms could be positive if implemented effectively. Leona kept her focus on the structure taking shape. In meetings with operations and compliance, she pushed for clarity in every clause of the passenger equity charter draft. No vague language, no room for interpretation that could be twisted to excuse bias. By the end of the week, the public conversation had shifted from isolated incident to systemic reform. That was the window she needed. In a quiet moment late Friday, Langston stopped by her temporary office. "I didn't expect this to move so fast," he admitted. "It didn't move fast," Leona said. "It was already here. We're just seeing it now because people are watching." He studied her for a moment. "You're not going to let this fade, are you?" "No," she said, "because if it fades, it was never change." As he left, she turned back to her notes. The work ahead was still heavy, but the momentum had shifted. What began in the narrow aisle of a plane was now unfolding in boardrooms, online forums, and investor calls. The challenge would be to carry it forward without losing its edge. She closed her laptop for the night, the soft click of the latch echoing in the quiet room. Outside, the city's lights shimmered on the wet streets, and in the distance, a plane's lights cut through the low clouds, rising into the night. The drafting room was a glass cube on the 12th floor, sunlight spilling through just enough to make the conference table glow. Outside, Heathrow's runway stretched toward the horizon, planes climbing into the pale morning. Inside, the first version of the passenger equity charter lay printed in front of each person. Its crisp pages weighted with the sense of something new being built. Leona had arrived early, placing her own notes beside the draft. She knew this document had to be more than an internal memo. It needed to be a living framework, one that would survive leadership changes, market shifts, and the natural erosion that comes when public attention drifts elsewhere. Victor Langston entered with a mug of tea, nodding to her before taking his seat at the head of the table. McKinney came in moments later, eyes already scanning the pages as though searching for points to contest. Denise Albright followed, carrying a binder thicker than the charter draft itself. Richard Voss settled into a chair opposite Leona. "The first thing we need to agree on is language," he said. "If this isn't clear to the crews, it won't hold. That's why we start with the first clause," Leona said. She read aloud. "No passenger shall be reassigned from their purchased seat except for documented safety reasons. All such reassignments must be entered into the operational log at the time of occurrence and flagged for oversight review." McKinney tapped his pen. What qualifies as a safety reason? Leona met his eyes. Anything that impacts the ability to operate the aircraft safely. Medical emergencies, mechanical failures that require seat changes, or compliance with air safety regulations. Not a frequent flyer wanted a different seat. Denise nodded. "We'll list qualifying scenarios explicitly to avoid ambiguity." The second clause dealt with service equity. All passengers, regardless of cabin class, will receive consistent and equitable service in accordance with the airline's published standards. Differences in offerings between cabins must not translate into differences in dignity. Richard leaned back. "That last phrase, differences in dignity, is going to rattle some people." "Then it's the right phrase," Leona said. They moved through the clauses one by one. Real-time reporting requirements, quarterly public audits, independent oversight authority. McKinney pushed back on the Oversight Council's access to raw data, citing security concerns. Denise countered that anonymized data could protect privacy while still revealing patterns. By midday, they had a working draft that felt both specific and enforceable. Langston leaned forward, hands clasped. "We'll present this to the board next week. I want it unanimously adopted." McKinney frowned. "You may not get unanimous. Then we push until we do." Langston replied. Leona scanned the room. "We also need to prepare for cultural resistance. Policy is easy to print. It's harder to live." Denise suggested a rollout plan, mandatory training sessions for all crew, starting with management and senior attendants. Scenario-based modules using real incidents, anonymized but detailed. Role-play exercises to teach refusal of inappropriate requests without bias. And leadership bonuses tied to closing identified service gaps, Leona added. If equity isn't linked to performance reviews and compensation, it will always be treated as optional. That afternoon, they moved to the training center across the street. A group of new hires sat in a mock cabin setup, waiting for the session to begin. Leona watched from the back as the facilitator walked them through a scenario nearly identical to her own experience. A passenger with a valid business class ticket being told to move. "Who gets to bend the rule?" the facilitator asked. "No one," a trainee replied, "unless it's a safety reason, and it gets logged." "Good," the facilitator said. "Now practice how to say no with respect." Leona observed each interaction closely. Some trainees stumbled over their words. Others found a professional firmness quickly. It was a start, but she could feel how ingrained the old habits were. Later, in a smaller breakout room, she spoke directly to the group. "You're going to face moments where someone with status or influence wants you to bend the rules in their favor. Your job isn't to make them happy. It's to make sure the rules are applied fairly." One young attendant raised a hand. "What if my supervisor tells me to do it anyway?" "Then you document the instruction and escalate it," Leona said. "The policy protects you too." By the time she left the training center, the sun was dipping low, streaking the sky with gold and gray. The draft charter was in her bag, marked with a dozen sticky notes. She knew the language on those pages would be tested in ways they couldn't yet predict. Back at headquarters, Langston stopped her in the corridor. "We've got union reps coming in tomorrow. They're already nervous about how this will be enforced." "Let them be nervous," Leona said. "If they value the crews they represent, they'll see this as protection, not punishment." McKinney passed them on his way out, giving Leona a tight nod. She returned it, but her mind was already on the next phase, building the Oversight Council, setting the audit calendar, making sure the new standards didn't just exist on paper. That night, in her hotel room, she opened the charter draft one more time. She read it slowly, picturing each clause in practice, imagining the moments in flight when it would matter. A mother with a baby being offered the same respect as a solo business traveler. A non-English-speaking passenger getting the meal they ordered without having to fight for it. A seat staying with the person who paid for it, no matter who else wanted it. She closed the file and sat back. The charter was more than policy. It was a promise. And promises, she knew, only mattered if you made them in public and kept them in quiet. The first full day of company-wide training began before dawn. In classrooms across Skyreach's global network, crews logged in from break rooms and training centers. Some sat with steaming mugs of coffee, others with arms folded, their expressions neutral. At the Heathrow Training Center, Leona stood in the observation area, watching a group of 20 attendants take their seats in a mock cabin. The room smelled faintly of new upholstery and the lemony cleaning solution used on the practice seats. The walls were lined with posters about safety procedures. But today's session had a different focus. The facilitator, a woman named Claire with 15 years of in-flight experience, began with a scenario. A passenger with a confirmed first-class ticket is told to move for another traveler. No explanation beyond company policy is given. The class was asked, "What do you do?" A few attendants shifted uncomfortably. One man near the aisle spoke first. "Depends who's asking." Claire paused. "That's the problem we're here to fix. It doesn't depend on who's asking. It depends on the policy, and the policy is clear only safety reasons, documented in real time." Leona watched the reactions closely. Some nodded in agreement, others looked down at their notepads. She knew change rarely started with enthusiasm. It started with understanding. The second exercise was more subtle. 2 passengers, same meal preference, but only one portion left. Who gets it? The trainees began discussing status level and comfort level before Claire interrupted. That thinking is what creates unequal treatment. If there's a shortage, you follow the documented priority list, and you offer alternatives with the same tone and respect to everyone. In the back, a young woman named Mariah raised her hand. "What if one passenger gets angry? Then you de-escalate with professionalism," Claire said. "But you don't rewrite fairness because someone's louder." During a break, Leona stepped into the training floor to speak with the group. "You're going to face pressure from every direction: passengers, supervisors, even your own habits. The charter isn't just a rule book. It's protection for you to do your job without favoritism, without fear of retaliation for treating people equally." A man in the second row raised his hand. "What about the passengers who think they're entitled to better treatment because of who they are?" Leona didn't hesitate. That's why the charter exists. It's the framework you can point to when you have to say no. You're not refusing them. The rule is refusing them. Later that afternoon, she toured the call center, where agents were also being trained. The scripts on their screens had been rewritten to remove language that could create disparities. Instead of, "Let me see what I can do," which often led to bending rules for some and not others, the new phrase was, "Here's what the policy allows, and here's how we can help within that." One agent, a middle-aged man named Luis, told her quietly, "This is going to make my job easier. I've had callers try to get me to change seats for friends or clients. Now I can point to the rule and be done with it." Not everyone was as welcoming. In the operations office, a senior scheduling manager voiced his concerns to McKinney while Leona was present. "We're going to lose flexibility if we stick to this too rigidly." "Flexibility without accountability is just discretion in disguise," Leona said. And that's what created the problem. By the end of the week, preliminary reports from training sessions worldwide showed a mix of responses. Some crews embraced the clarity. Others grumbled that the new rules would slow them down or make it harder to accommodate important passengers. Leona read every report. She marked the regions where resistance was strongest, noting the need for follow-up visits. Change could not be left to drift. It had to be reinforced until it became habit. At one evening session for senior flight attendants, she was asked directly if she believed bias had been deliberate in most cases. Some was, she admitted. Some was unconscious. Both have the same impact on the passenger, so both require the same correction. Afterward, Owen Park found her in the hallway. "The new training's making a difference," he said. "People are thinking twice before they make a call that favors one person over another." "Thinking twice is the start," Leona replied. "Acting right is the goal." Back in her hotel room that night, She opened the latest draft of the Passenger Equity Charter. It now included a new clause, one she had added after seeing the training in action. All employees are empowered and expected to refuse any directive that conflicts with this charter, without fear of retaliation. It was a safeguard for the Owens of the company, the ones who saw the problem but didn't yet feel safe speaking up. The following Monday, Langston invited her to a board subcommittee meeting to preview the charter before the full board vote. The mood was cautious but not hostile. Several members praised the clarity of the policy, though one voiced concern about potential loss of high-value customers. Leona answered without flinching. If your definition of a high-value customer is someone who expects others to be treated worse, they're not the kind of loyalty you want. By the end of the meeting, even the doubters had little left to argue. The charter would go to a vote by the full board at the end of the month. Leaving the building, Leona walked past a row of framed photographs of Skyreach aircraft through the decades. They showed progress in design, speed, comfort, but none of that meant anything if the culture inside the plane was still stuck in the past. She thought of row 34 of Samantha's quiet support, of Owen's careful glances, of the man in row 27 who had asked for the meal he ordered and been told to lower his voice. Each one was a reason the work mattered. The cultural shift had begun. It was uneven, imperfect, and still met with pockets of resistance. But it was moving, and if it kept moving, one day it would feel as ordinary as boarding a plane and finding your seat exactly where it should be. The morning sky over New York looked like brushed steel. Low clouds hovered above the runways at JFK, and the wet tarmac reflected blue taxiway lights like a ribbon of stars. Leona stepped out of the car with a carry-on and the easy stride of someone who knew where she was going. 3 weeks had passed since the flight from San Francisco. In that time, she had sat through long meetings, signed off on language that had been argued word by word, and watched a company turn its face toward the wind. Inside the terminal, a quiet buzz moved through the air. Skyreach staff wore slim black badges printed with 3 words that had already begun to change the daily script: equity, safety, dignity. A desk agent greeted each traveler with the same tone. "Good morning. Passport, please. Thank you." Leona approached the premium counter and placed her documents on the smooth surface. The agent looked up, met her eyes, and smiled without a trace of calculation. "Good morning, Dr. Marshall. Welcome back. Your seat is 5C. Boarding begins in 20 minutes. Would you like a bottle of water for the wait?" "Yes, please. Thank you." That was the first signal. Not the greeting itself, but the absence of anything else. No pause. No doubt. No attempt to shift her anywhere but where her ticket said she belonged. She moved through security with the same ease. Shoes off, laptop out. A guard waved a different passenger to remove a jacket and then gave the same instruction to the man behind him. The rules matched the tone, consistent, even. At the gate, a small press cluster waited along the windows. No microphones, no raised voices. They were here for the vote, not for her. The board of Skyreach Aviation Group was gathering in a glass-walled room nearby. The Passenger Equity Charter would rise or fall in less than an hour. Samantha texted from the city. "My class is watching the live blog. If they pass it, I owe them cocoa. If they pass it, I owe you cocoa too." Leona wrote back. "Make it 2 cups. One for you. One for the day that needed this." A Skyreach aide appeared at her side. "Dr. Marshall." "Mr. Langston asked if you would join for the final readout." Leona followed the aide upstairs to the boardroom terrace. Through the glass she could see the table she had come to know. Victor Langston at the head, Denise Albright with her binder, Richard Voss with a tablet open to a dashboard she had insisted be public. Howard McKinney sat near the far end, his posture straighter than it had been in the first days. He did not look like a man resisting. He looked like a man who had decided to own the work he had to do. Langston opened the meeting without ceremony. The charter has been through review and governance, audit, and legal. We have the cost models. We have the training plan. We have the Oversight Council slate, which includes community advocates, a consumer rights attorney, a disability access expert, and a former union steward. The vote today is to adopt the charter as core policy. No speeches followed, no circling words. One by one, the board members raised their hands, all in favor. Each yes landed like a small bell. Unanimous, said the secretary. The room did not erupt. It exhaled. Denise closed her binder with quiet finality. Richard sent a message to operations. McKinney stood and extended a hand to Leona. He did not talk about optics. He did not talk about cost. He said one sentence she had wanted to hear since the jet bridge in London. We will keep it honest. Later, in a small media room. Langston read a brief statement. Skyreach adopts the Passenger Equity Charter effective today. Involuntary seat changes are prohibited except for safety and must be documented in real time. We will publish quarterly equity reports by route and station. We will subject ourselves to independent oversight with access to our raw operational data. Leadership compensation will be tied to measurable progress. This is not a press cycle. It is a standard, no flourish, clear dates, clear owners, no request for patience. The cameras recorded and then went still. Leona checked the time. Boarding. At the gate. The agent lifted the microphone. We will begin boarding for Skyreach Flight 176 to San Francisco. Pre-boarding for passengers with small children or those needing extra time. Group 1 may line up now. She walked forward with Group 1. The line was a short river of calm faces. A student with a backpack, a retiree in a tweed cap, a woman in a gray coat speaking softly in French on a phone. No one looked at her as a test. No one moved as if to block or redirect. Inside the aircraft, the cabin air smelled faintly of fresh coffee and citrus cleaner. Business class was a curve of soft light and measured quiet. Leona stepped to the center section. Seat 5C, her name on the screen. A folded blanket arranged with the edge aligned to the armrest. She rested her palm on the headrest for a breath, then sat. Patrice Colburn approached from the galley, the same pressed uniform, the same polished hair. Something in the shoulders had changed, perhaps the set of her mouth. Not forced, open. Good morning, Dr. Marshall. Welcome aboard. Would you like still or sparkling? Still, thank you. She placed the glass on the tray with care and did not linger. The service tone was neither indulgent nor cold. It was professional. It was correct. It was, finally, ordinary. Owen Park passed through a moment later, now wearing a small pin on his name badge that read Equity Instructor. He caught Leona's eye and gave the smallest nod, then moved on to help a passenger lift a bag. 2 rows up. A man stood in the aisle with a familiar kind of smile. Grant Holloway. He was thinner than before and carried his own bag. He met Leona's gaze for a second and then looked away. A different man stood in the place where his entitlement once lived. There had been a statement last week from his firm. He had resigned. No detail, only a sentence about values and the work he planned to do next. The market had already forgotten him. A woman in uniform paused at 1A to greet an elderly traveler in Hindi, then shifted into English for his companion. Leona wrote a small note on her phone. Language access, audit, route-specific training. The Oversight Council had asked for a list of quick wins to test the new system. This would be one. She felt the old habit rise, the need to check every angle, the urge to catch what could go wrong. Then she reminded herself of something she had told Samantha on the curb in London. Change is not a promise. It is a practice. Practice has a rhythm. Today was part of that rhythm. The safety video played. Passengers watched without distraction. A child in 6A asked his mother why the life vest was under the seat. She explained in a whisper that felt like a blessing on the room. The aircraft pushed back, the engines deepened, and the plane tilted toward daylight. As they climbed, Patrice offered menus with the same phrasing to each passenger. Welcome. Here are the options. I will return to take your selection. She did not rest a hand on one headrest longer than another. She did not fold her attention based on who had eye contact and who did not. Leona ordered the vegetarian dish. When it arrived, it was plated neatly. The tray did not rattle. The napkin did not arrive like a sorry. A few rows behind the curtain, the economy cart rolled. The service there matched the schedule, not the face. Owen checked repeatedly on a mother with a toddler and then moved to a student who had raised a hand 2 minutes earlier. The sequence matched the order of need. Halfway over the country, Leona opened a draft email to the Oversight Council. Add meal allocation to the early audit plan. Break out by pre-order status, cabin, and language. Validate with random checks by route. Publish the fix. The reply arrived before she closed her laptop. Done. She leaned back and let the seat do what it was designed to do. Support without drama. A quiet victory does not play like a headline. It moves like breath. In, out, again. For a moment her thoughts returned to row 34. To Samantha passing club soda across an aisle. To Owen weighing which truth he could say out loud. To the man in row 27 who asked for the meal he ordered and was told to be quiet. She saw each face the way an architect sees a beam, necessary to keep the span from falling. The captain spoke near the end of the flight. Routine weather in San Francisco. Expected arrival on time. Thank you for flying with us. Leona closed her eyes and let his voice fade into the soft, mechanical music of descent. As the wheels touched down, she felt the small thud of tires finding earth. Relief never sounded as loud as anger. She thought. It sounded like standard practice. At the gate, passengers stood when it was their row. No rush, no jockeying. Patrice unlocked the curtain and stepped back so economy could deplane first, a small thing that meant a great many small things had been considered. When it was her turn, Leona lifted her bag with one hand and walked toward the door. No escort, no camera, only a gate agent greeting each traveler with the same words and the same tone. Outside, San Francisco wore a thin winter light. She tugged at the cuff of her blazer and saw a faint dot where a sauce once landed on a different flight. She had never sent that jacket to the cleaner who promised to make it disappear. She kept the mark and the memory. She had not tried to win a scene. She had tried to build a standard. Standards outlast people. Standards hold when anger is gone and headlines have moved on. Standards let a seat stay a seat because the rules mean what they say. Her phone buzzed. A photo from Samantha. Coco in a classroom. A caption that read, "They passed it. My students have questions about how to build this at school," Leona replied. Start with 3 things. Clear rules, visible audits, consequences that teach, not just punish, and make it ordinary. She slid the phone into her pocket and walked toward the exit. No one tested her. No one measured her before deciding how to treat her. The aisle looked different now. The tone sounded different. The work would continue. Audits every quarter. Training with teeth. A council that did not drift when attention did. But today, she allowed herself to say one small word out loud as the automatic doors opened to the cool bay air. Finally, the plane lands. The room votes. The charter lives. But the real ending is smaller and stronger than a headline. A gate agent greeting everyone the same way. A mother offered help before she has to ask. A meal served because it was ordered, not because someone insisted. A seat that stays yours because the rules finally mean what they say. Equity, safety, dignity, ordinary words. Powerful when they stop being slogans and start being habits. Dr. Leona Marshall did not win a scene. She built a standard. Patrice learned to measure service by fairness, not faces. Owen found his voice and taught others to use theirs. Samantha carried the lesson into a classroom where the next generation is already taking notes. And to those who chose convenience over conscience, the story answered with accountability. Discrimination steals breath in quiet ways. We refuse that quiet. We see it. We name it. We change the structure that lets it breathe. Hold this with us. Speak up when the curtain tries to hide the difference. Defend the person who is asked to move when safety is not the reason. Remember that policy beats apology, and repair is not a speech. It is a practice. If this story stayed with you, if it made you feel, if it made you think, add your voice to ours. Like the video. Share it with someone who needs the courage. And subscribe to the channel so these stories keep turning pain into real change. Stay with us for the next flight, the next standard, the next quiet victory.